Welcome to The Grind with Chris, where raw conversations meet real growth with life-changing perspectives.
What I'm about to tell you is not some made-up internet story. It's a thing that happened to me, and it changed my life forever. When I came up to North Dakota, was about March 3rd of 2011. And when we came up here, there was only 5 of us. We had to live in Glendive, Montana for about 3 months. And in that time, we were exploding as a company. We ended up starting to get so big that we had to move to Dickinson, North Dakota, into a trailer park. I would say probably about a year later, we went from 5 employees to about 250, probably 40 or 50 trucks. Well, my father-in-law, who was my boss for many years, and he's actually a multiplier in my life, put a lot of work on me. And so we only had a few office people. We had people writing tickets, and then we had me and him. He put a lot of the strain and the work on me because he thought I could handle it. And for a while, I did. And so I was doing the safety position. I was doing the office manager position. I was doing the training and setting up all of the certifications and stuff that we needed. Constantly trying to figure out how to get everybody scheduled in and everybody to make sure that they still had their certifications at the right time. It was a lot. It was a lot for that position. And I really don't know why I let it get to me, because it was one of the best jobs I've ever had in my life. And so as time started progressing, we started getting bigger. He decided to start hiring this group out of Bakersfield. They were bad news. And I tried to tell him many times not to hire these people, that they were setting up shop, that they were going to use the company as a front, and they were doing a lot of things like prostitution, selling drugs, whatever they could. So they went and set up shop in a town called Minot, North Dakota. Well, there was this one safety guy who was pretty much the shot caller of them. And he started bringing all of the people that he could think of. Well, it started to cause problems. We had one of our welders nearly stabbed to death by one of them. They all got drunk together. They must have said something wrong to him, and he threatened to shoot him. So he went up to his house. Well, in order to stop him, they stabbed him. And then we ended up having our trailers raided by the ATF. That is what started the downfall of our company up here. But during this whole time, I'm still trying to maintain everything. And back then, I couldn't smoke weed because they UA randomly. And sometimes it would be in 2 weeks. So in order to pass the test, I would end up having to meet some people, and they introduced me to this stuff called spice. Never heard of it. Never thought of doing it. So I started to pick up on it. And back then I drank, but I didn't drink so much. But I did drink because that's what everybody else did in the oil field. They were either doing Adderall, which, could pass the test. They could do meth, which passed the test pretty quickly. I don't know how many of them were doing coke. I'm sure a lot of them were. But that's what the oil field brings. Not as much these days because they're very strict. They UA and stuff a lot more. And now you're in a system that if you fail, it's kind of like the truckers clearinghouse. Once you fail UA, you go into this system, which their system's called DISA. And you go into a system, and it's very hard to get out if you fail UA. You have to take classes. You have to pay money. It sucks. It's not worth it. So that's why a lot of them would resort to the things that would pass the test. So I started to smoke this spice, and I loved it. I loved it. Now that I look back on it, I hated it. But I thought it was amazing when I was doing it. And so I started doing it so much and so often that in the mornings I would wake up and I would puke all over every morning. It became a routine. I'd do it all day long, wake up in the morning, it'd have me sick to my stomach, I would puke, and not to be descriptive in it, but it would be like a greenish. It wasn't healthy for me at all. Once I did that, I went to a friend's house, and this was probably, I would say, August or September of 2014. And at this time, I was stressed. I was doing so many jobs at so many times. It was just, I just needed a break. I needed to get some of the work off of me. And I tried talking to my father-in-law and kept saying, hey, can you relieve some of the work? But he just wouldn't listen. And he's like, oh no, you can handle it. You can do it. And that's when I just did what I always do. I turned to drugs. Success came fast, but so did the wrong influences. We started to hire guys. I started to have some of them trade me ecstasy pills, trade me things that I could do in order to get them a job. And so I was already starting to slip down. Well, one of these particular guys that I hired came up one night in his truck and he was smoking something. And I'd been drinking. I probably had 4 or 5 beers. I had a good buzz. And he comes up and he starts smoking this thing. And I walked out and I said, hey man, let me have a hit of that. And he's like, all right. So I'm standing there at the truck and I take probably 3, 4 hits. And I stood there for a minute. And that's when I started to have a feeling that I've never had before. And I look back at him and I'm like, dude, that is some amazing spice. And he looks at me, kind of chuckles a little bit, and he says, dude, that ain't spice. And I said, what is it? And immediately he says, it's angel dust. And that's when I was like, angel dust? And I've only ever heard of it. I've never done it. So immediately the addict kicked in. And at that time, I was making so much money that I couldn't even spend it. I was working 80, 90 hours a week. I barely had any weekends. I was doing great. But the problem is that when you're making that kind of money, you're spending that kind of money crazy. And so right away, I was like, let me get some from you. And he's like, well, I don't got any more right now, but I can get some when I go back down to California. I said, all right, let's do it. And so I waited and waited. Come about October 1st or so of 2014, he calls me up and he says, I'm going down there. And I immediately like, all right. So I go meet up. I give him $300. I said, here's $300. Do whatever you can with it. He takes off, finally comes back about 2 weeks later, says, yeah, I have it. And so I was like, all right, let's go over here. And so back then I had a Cadillac STS. And so we took the STS and we went over to this place called Dickinson Dyke. And when we sat there, he pulled out this boulder. And it was enormous. And I was just absolutely stunned that my $300 got that. I've never seen $300 these days ever make it that far. So I was shocked. And I said, all right, man, I got some spice. Let's roll it up in the spice. And he said, no, you don't want to do that. I said, all right, I'll get some weed. Let's do it. He said, no, you don't want to do that. He said, for your first time, you just want to roll it up in some parsley and sit back and smoke it. So he starts rolling them up. He hands me one. I light it up. We keep going. And it just was crazy. I was in and out and in and out. And I just didn't know how to handle it. I've never done it before. I've only ever heard of it from other people. And so he starts going. He ends up doing 25 of these sticks. And we must have done 2, maybe 3 as we were doing it. And I just kept going in and out, in and out. And then he finally says, all right, well, I need to go. And I remember him asking me for a few, which I gave him a couple, I think 2 or 3. And I went and dropped them off. I don't know how I got where I was or what I was doing, but I ended up on this hill on the back road. And I was just sitting there listening to my bass and sitting in my car and just enjoying it. I don't really remember a whole lot. Everything was more like a story, like a movie clip. It just kept coming in phases. So as it was coming, I would just enjoy it for what it was. Well, I don't really remember a whole lot after that. The next thing that I do remember is I'm sitting at my house. And at that time, Grand Theft Auto 5, it had only been out for a few years, but I hadn't really played it, but I was playing it. And I was just lost in the game. Like, I really felt like I was the players of the game. And so I was playing it. My father-in-law called, and he said something and talked to me. And I was like, okay, I love you. And right then, he knew something was wrong because I don't ever tell him I love him. I do love him, but he's very Southern, and he's very blunt, and he's just not the kind of guy to show affection. I know that he loves me, but he's just not that type of guy. And so when he hung up, I don't know how much time passed, and I don't know how many days passed. All I remember now, it was my sister's birthday. And October 11th, they were going to this Price of Rights thing. It was in Bismarck. So they took off. I had her daughter and my son and one other of the kids. I can't remember which one. He has 4 kids. I couldn't remember which ones were born and which ones weren't. Anyways, so they take off, and my wife's sitting on the couch. And I remember seeing her, and all of a sudden, I just had a sudden urge that I wanted to do the dirty. And so I start chasing her around the house. I start trying to strip her clothes off. And as I'm doing that, the kids are running around, and she was scared. She had no idea what was going on. I've never put this kind of stuff around her. She ends up finding out I do it, but she never knows at the time that I'm doing it because she always trusts me. And I've burnt her trust many times. So as she's doing that, she gets the kids and puts them in the bathroom. I keep chasing her around trying to do it. And she grabs a fork and she stabs me in my left elbow. Well, I remember looking down and seeing blood, but I couldn't feel no pain. Come to find out, Angel Dust has a pain inhibitor. You don't feel pain. So as I'm doing that, she calls my parents. I remember my parents came in the house, and I remember my mom was about 5 feet in front of my dad. And I remember that I dropped to the ground, and I just started slithering like a snake. And I'm talking, I have no idea how my body moved the way that it did. And I remember going in between my mom's legs and coming up, and I saw my stepdad, and I kissed him like a cobra. And I dropped back down, went back between my mom's legs, and I ran to the bathroom. At this time, my parents are freaked out. They call the ambulance. And I'll tell you one thing, if my parents call the ambulance, coming from the life that I've come from, you know that they're scared. And so I remember sitting in the bathroom, and I was taking a shower, and I just kept singing this Tech 9 song, which I love Tech 9. So I was singing Who You Came to See by Tech 9. And I'm just having my own show inside the bathroom. And then I see my brother at the doorway. So I grab the shower and I start singing, and I start swinging the shower with the water running all over the bathroom, trying to spray him at the doorway. Then he walked away, and a few seconds later I turned and I saw this lady in blue, and I had no idea who she was. I tried to spray her while I'm rapping this song and just having fun. I remember that I ran out of the shower, completely naked, out into the living room. And I remember there was my mom, my dad, my sister-in-law, my brother. The girl in blue, would come to find out, was the paramedic. And I run out there and I grab my junk. And I just start flinging it around, yelling at him. And I said, hey, Piggy, do you want to suck on my... And I took back off into the bathroom. And so I was back in the shower having fun. And I remember that the feeling of the shower was like blood at the moment. And so it was just a weird feeling. And the whole time this is happening, it was like movie clips over and over and over. And then I remember the shower curtain said something wrong to me. And so I looked at the shower curtain. We start having a disagreement. We start arguing over something, and I have no idea what. I'm pushing on it and slapping it. Next thing you know, I get wrapped up in it. And I am completely wrapped up in the shower curtain. I have no idea. So shower curtain 1, Chris 0. And I fall over out of the shower into, which it was a tub shower, like apartments have. And so when I fell out of it, I tripped over the part of the tub and I just hit the ground. Wham! And when I hit that ground, I could not move. And that's when they found it time to come in, put me on the gurney. And I remember that I was like handcuffed and I was face first on the gurney. Actually, I was upside down on the gurney. And the whole time they were taking me outside, it was dark. And they're taking me outside and I can just see the lights, the ambulance lights in the trailer park right there. And I could see all the neighbors outside watching what's going on, being nosy like neighbors are. And I knew inside that I was screwed. I knew there was no way that my father-in-law wasn't going to know. I didn't care at that moment, but I knew inside. I remember feeling it that, oh, I'm going to be in trouble. And at that time, I thought I was arrested. I did not know that it was just the ambulance. I thought the cops were there and everything. I remember that I was like, wee, as they're carrying me on the board to the ambulance, not taking anything serious, not knowing the effects that it was going to have on my life. I'm just off in my own world, doing my own thing. And now talking to my wife, the moment from that to the time I finally comprehended where I was and came back to earth, I guess you could say, I was at the hospital just shouting at her, yelling at her, cussing at her. I don't remember any of that. All I remember is riding in the ambulance, and then I remember waking up at the hospital. But in between that moment, my wife was just absolutely devastated. And she said I was screaming vulgar things at her. I was yelling at her. There's nothing I can say to her, but I'm sorry. I don't remember any of that. And so finally, I remember I looked up and I saw the ceiling. And I finally looked down across the hall at the doorway. And there's 2 cops sitting there. And I'm like, oh man. And then I looked down at the foot of my bed and there she is, crying, absolute terror in her eyes. I will never forget to look in her eyes, never. And she finally looks at me and she says, what the hell was that? And I didn't say nothing. And she looked at me with the look like I want an answer. And I finally looked down at her and I said, it was angel dust. And she says, what? How did you get a hold of that? And I didn't say nothing. And she said his name. And she knew exactly who it was. And I ignored her for a minute. Then I finally nodded. So I asked her, am I under arrest? Are those cops here for me? And she says, no, they're not here for you. She said, hold on, let me go get the doctor. So she walks out the door and gets the doctor. He comes back in. And at this moment, I finally try to get up. I try to move. And that's when I finally saw that I was duct taped. And it wasn't just 1 or 2 turns of the duct tape. It looked like they used a whole roll. I just could not move. I was so stuck. And I look at her and I'm like, what the hell? And they're like, we couldn't contain you. We couldn't get you to stop. And I'm like, all right. And so I said, well, cut me out. Like, I want out. They finally cut me out the duct tape. And he says, well, we need a UA sample. I'm like, all right. Well, he hands me this, like, it looked like a pitcher. It was probably like a hospital-sized pitcher or something. And he says, I need you to go in this. And I remember looking down as I was going, and there was just absolutely no yellow color to it whatsoever. When I looked at it, the first thought that came to my mind was it was root beer. It was just absolutely like brown, and it didn't look like it came out of me. Let's just make that clear. And he comes back probably 20 minutes later and says, well, you got some blood in your urine. And I'm like, well, that's kind of understandable considering what I've been doing. He says, well, we would like you to go to Bismarck and we'd like you to check in to this hospital. So they wanted me to check into this institution and be all right for a few days. And whatever, I wasn't doing that. So I get my wife and we start to leave, and she looks at me and says, "I'm not coming home with you. I'm too scared." And I remember that it just absolutely hurt my feelings. I just couldn't believe it. The coming down was way worse than the high. So as we were leaving and my wife goes and she drops me off at the house, I ask her on the way, does James know, which is my father-in-law? And she says, "Oh yeah." She's like, "Everybody pretty much knows." And I knew right then. I was like, "Oh, there goes my job." Was in a higher position. There's no way they were going to keep me. And so at that moment, I decided I'm going to sit down and talk to him and tell him that I'm just going to go back to smoking weed. That's what I want to do. This is what it's all about. And I tried to explain to him that it was just too much. Like, you put too much on me at that time. And so he came over. My mom came over, kind of had an intervention. And that's when he said, "We're probably not going to keep you." And right away, I was like, "I want rehab. Like, as a company, you got to offer me rehab." And so he looked into it and he said, "All right, yeah, they will. And your job will be here when you get back." Okay. So I end up looking around and I find this place in Battle Creek, Michigan. And I believe it was called a New Recovery is what it was called. And so I ship off up there. I ride the bus. The first few days that you go to a rehab, they put you in a detox area. And they put you in there because as you're coming down, you want to be frisky. Your body's going through a lot of different things at that moment, and they don't want you to go and do other stuff with the people that are there. So they make you sit in this detox. And I remember one of those nights, we got to go over to the steam room. And I remember I was going to the steam room. It was probably 2 or 3, 4 days after the whole Angel Dust incident. I'd say about 4 because I had to ride the bus up there. So it was about 4 days later. So I go up there. Before I go into the steam room, I lift up my shirt. I take off my shorts. And I just see bruises everywhere. And I'm talking all up and down my arms. Everywhere. They were just all over. And I was like, it's kind of understandable. I was slithering like a snake. My body isn't made to move like that. So eventually I move over to I would say population. It's a prison term, but that's what I would call it. And move over with everybody else. Now, when I say that the people in rehab have drug addictions, that is underestimating the problems that are in that building. They made me look like I had never done anything in my life. It was just, I feel so bad that people allow themselves to get that addicted to something. It was crazy. So I started double guessing me being there for the fact that I really only ever smoked weed in my life. Yeah, I dabbled with drugs growing up and stuff, but I was never so hooked on them where, I was more of a binge drug. And a lot of the time it was only because I was selling it. And so when I was selling it, I would keep doing it. And then eventually I'd run out, spend all the money, and I'd have to stop. And I'd stop for, sometimes years at a time, and then repeat the cycle. I started talking to some of the people in there. And it's just crazy the amount of drugs that people can do and still live. I was just in there for angel dust, and my main problem was weed. So I really felt uncomfortable listening to all these stories and stuff. And I remember there was one girl in there, and she used to put her hair over her face. And she wouldn't talk to nobody. She was very introverted, I guess is the way to say it. And she'd sit over by herself, just completely lost in her own. So I finally asked some of the people, like, what's her deal? And they explained to me that her dad was shooting her up since she was 13 years old. Like, your own father at 13 years old? Like, that's insane. And that right there just shows you that we have such an effect on our children. Sometimes positively and sometimes negatively. But I just can't believe that somebody's dad would do that to them. It's absolutely just astounds me. You're supposed to be there to protect them. At 13 years old, she wasn't even fully formed into a woman yet, and you're slamming dope into her arms. It's shocking. It really is that there's people out there like that. And I know that there's a lot more out there than that. So I'm sitting there, and I would talk to my wife every night, and one night she calls me, And she says, well, they're going to let you go, but they're going to allow you to have full benefits, full unemployment benefits. And I was like, okay. Well, the whole reason I was there was to try to keep my job. So immediately, I'm not staying here. And as long as you're not court ordered to go in there, when you're in rehab, it's completely voluntary. They cannot stop you from leaving. And so I tried to do a couple of the days there, and that's just when I just didn't want to be there. I didn't feel comfortable there. It wasn't my type of setting. And now that I look back at it, I should have stayed and just finished it. It probably would have saved me from episode 4 that we'll be talking about in the next episode. But I didn't. And so immediately I called my mom and I said, I want out of here. Get me out of here. So we end up finding that I can ride a train all the way from Battle Creek, Michigan. My stepdad was working up here because I brought my whole family up here, and he was working up here. So he met me up in Williston, and he got me, and I went and stayed with him in Sydney, where he would sleep in his camper, and then eventually took me home. And I just wish that I would have made different choices at that time. I wish that I would have followed what people were trying to tell me, but I wouldn't listen to nobody. I was selfish. And of course, none of this was my fault. It was my father-in-law's fault. So I had no accountability at this time. I didn't accept anything as my own doing. It was always everybody else. I realized at the time that the drugs didn't just hurt me. It hurt a lot of people. The company started to not do very well after that. And he blames me for a lot of what happened. And yes, I did have some things to play at that, but also the people that he was hiring, having the ATF and other companies started to realize that they just didn't want us up there because we were a general contractor. And he had his own issues, and it also helped. And I've apologized. I've told him that I'm sorry. There's nothing I could do. While I was locked up, I wrote to the president, and I didn't want my job back. I just wanted to know how sorry I was because they had helped me many times. And I just completely ruined it. I wish that I could tell you that this was rock bottom, but it wasn't. In the next episode, I'm going to show you how I went to Minnesota and got in even more trouble and eventually put me into prison. And the whole time all this is happening, I thought I was completely in control. I wasn't. I was a fool. I made decisions that will forever affect my life. I've gotten past them, but they're still there. I've hurt people. I did damage to my son for being away. He's forgiven me, but I can still see things that it hurt him. I affected a lot of people, all by following my own selfish desires. I regret a lot of things that I've done. I don't know how to live my life without regret. And I hope that by telling you this story, that you'll see that I've done things that I am not proud of. And I hope that it'll help to earn the trust so that you'll join the community I have planned. Together we can find people who want to come together. I would love to have doctors and therapists and stuff join the community, not just to give us their services for free, but to help talk through some of these problems, because that's what a lot of people want. People want someone to talk to. But sometimes the person that you want to talk to isn't somebody who hasn't been through your life, someone who hasn't made the choices you have. I sure don't want to talk to a therapist who's never been through the things I've been through. I want to talk to people who have experienced the same type of lifestyle and have come out of it. That's what it's about. Not theory, but real life experiences. I was my own worst enemy. And if I didn't change, I was going to destroy everything around me and everyone who cared about me. Episode 4 is going to be even darker. It's going to be about betrayal, prison, falling down the rabbit hole even farther and farther. not thinking that I would ever be able to escape. It was definitely the darkest time of my life. And I was going down so fast, I had no control over it. And then for some reason, I went to prison. And prison is what saved my life.